I will say to you that my big concern goes beyond the Persian Gulf and the oil and the energy. The world came together, really the latest in the 80s, to say this is the international order of how commerce and transit happens on the ocean. Coal regs is what we call it for short. The rules of the road, if you are a mariner, right? And in it, they lay out what territorial waters are and then the agreements around the world on who can access certain things, how we consider it international, even though the 12 nautical mile range is no longer, the countries are too close together to do it. All of these things were negotiated over years, right? And because the Strait of Hormuz is so narrow, the world came up with this whole, hey, we'll let everybody come in and go because it's good for the economy for everybody, right? And Iran, when this was negotiated, was a relatively new country as we know it. The Islamic Revolution happened in 79. Coal regs, I want to say, was looked at and revamped in 82, 83, something like that. And even they agreed to this, right? Then the tanker wars happened where, a U.S. Navy ship hit a mine and Iranian vessels were sunk. Still, they did not close down the strait. So you had then a Persian Gulf War in 91. You had us go back into the same area in 2001. And then again in 2003. You had all of this conflict happen over the history of that region. And never before was it shut down to free trade. Never. Not like this. Never. Enter Donald John Trump. And for the first time in the liberal international order that we have enjoyed since post-World War II, the Strait of Hormuz has been shut down. Full stop. If that does not give you historical perspective, Sam and Sean, on how ridiculous these rank amateurs have been. Again, I gave you the Islamic Revolution. I gave you the tanker wars. I gave you Desert Storm 1. I gave you Persian Gulf War 2. I gave you post 9/11. I gave you all of this. And you can still drive your little fishing trawler through the Strait of Hormuz. Can't do it today, though. Can't do it today. That little point that we're looking at, we're talking about a traffic separation scheme that's 6 miles long, 2 miles on one side, a median, and then 2 miles on the other. How do I know? Commanded the unit that had to help keep it open for damn near 2 years. I'm just telling you, this is unprecedented. That's how ridiculous they have messed this up. And that kind of leads into what Iran is finally admitting out loud. When you have a golfing buddy and the son-in-law of the president as your lead negotiators, you are going to get a storm of feces unlike the world has never seen. Right? And Sean, you were the one to point this out because I had heard this, but I had not seen the actual clip. And I see the drop site is the one who dropped it. What are we supposed to do when our lead negotiators have no negotiation experience, but they're businessmen and they're making money? What do we do? You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of where I'm at. I turn it over to you two. I'm just like, this is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I have like a gajillion questions for you, Bobby. I guess the first thing I would ask is, you know, Trump famously went during his first term to the Middle East and had these big celebrations. I don't know if you remember the orb,
yep.
You know, all of that. And he really cozied up with a lot of those leaders. And, you know, I mean, if you haven't noticed by now, folks, the corruption is just rank over at 1600. With a headline like the one that we popped up earlier, where these Gulf states now have to accept this as a new normal. Mm-hmm. What are they thinking about as far as these investments, let's just call them, that they've made into Trump, into Kushner, and how they're kind of backfiring here?
Well, I can tell you this. They backed the wrong horse and now they know it. The only reason they were investing in Trump and Kushner and all this was because they thought it was the most guaranteed way to provide security. That security was necessary to deal with only one nation, and that was Iran. People need to understand the Arab countries, which are everybody but Iran, are different than the Persian country, which is Iran. There is rivalry there, but at the same time, kind of a tolerated standoff, entered the United States, who took over for the United Kingdom post-World War II, right? We, and I say we, the United States, went to these countries saying, your best way to stay secure, the best way to maximize your resources of oil is to let us be here, right? Now, to show you how that played out, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait back in the 90s, right? Because you had a president, regardless of what you think about Bush's domestic policy, George H.W. Bush, he was the youngest fighter pilot shot down in World War II. He knew what war was. It was the most clean and efficient war the United States has ever fought. It was unbelievable. Why? Because they understood the strategic objective. You had this brilliant four-star general named Colin Powell, who's like, this is the strategy. And then you had the rough and ready, but still brilliant Norman Schwarzkopf, who was on ground. This is what happens when you had diplomacy plus military aligned, right? And so the whole region bought into us being their protectors because of the efficiency. 6-week bombing from the air, 100-hour ground war, bada boom, bada bing, boom, boom, everybody's good. Right.
It doesn't hurt that Herbert Walker had a background in intelligence.
That too.
He understood policy. Yeah. He understood civilian leadership. He understood economic interests. Like, I was no fan of Herbert Walker Bush. Yeah, right. I mean, I was also in like 8th grade.
But Sam, while you're talking about that, though, the other piece that people forget about him, he was ambassador to the United Nations at one point, if I recall correctly. He had previous existing relationships with many of the people who came to power at that time. And then his relationship with Margaret Thatcher, when they would transition up. He knew people and relied on those connections, plus that intel background. Completely different war, right? We have put in front of the same group of nations the complete 180 opposite of that. Zero experience, zero capability, lackeys, and most importantly, not in it for the region, not in it even for the United States, in it for their own individual business. And this is the difference.
And on top of that, you have an intelligence team that can't be trusted outside of any foreign nation. I mean, you're going to give that to Trump, and he's going to take that with him to Mar-a-Lago's bathroom.
Yep. Yeah, but then you kind of hit on something too, Sean. You sit there and you discount your own intelligence organizations. Yeah. Overwhelmingly to buy into whatever you want, to do whatever you want. Well, that's not how that's supposed to work.
I want to stop you there, Bob, because that's another question I had for you. Is I remember watching the movie W. The Oliver Stone one, and I would assume during the the lead up to Afghanistan and Iraq, there were talks. I would imagine a lot of this is ripped from the headlines kind of stuff. But Richard Dreyfuss was playing Cheney in that movie, and he's like, right here, the Strait of Hormuz. We kind of don't want to touch that because then we're really screwed. Yep. So I'm wondering, the intelligence team around Trump is obviously a bunch of yes men.
Yes,
but there were people in there that I presume would have said, "Hey, this is a little dangerous." So what's going through his head that he's like, "No, I'm going to ignore everything that previous administrations for the past 45 years have said no to."
Well, it's interesting, and Amy right there is hitting on it. We have people still who are dedicated to the craft that they are, but it's that final rung of intelligence that screens what goes to the president, what doesn't. Those are the political appointees now that are lackeys, not the subject matter experts. I mean, we just confirmed a DNI that has basically no business being DNI, and the acting DNI before that couldn't even get a top secret clearance. How are you supposed to do your job at 18 intelligence agencies? You can't even get a clearance. And then the person before that, Tulsi Gabbard, many believe has been compromised by other forces. So, of course, eventually, you're going to see an atrophy of real information that can be used to make decisions. When you add into that remember, we have all these various intelligence agencies. So each one of these major organizations in the federal government has their own. So we have DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, that gets information for the Pentagon. They can sit there and say, we're going to show this because we want to go to war. If you don't think Hegseth has not done that since becoming the Secretary of Defense, I got a bridge over some water in Arizona to sell you, because that is what has happened. We're going to find out about all of this when this administration is over.